When you hear the word Somalia, what comes to mind? For many people around the world, the first image is of pirates. We've seen them in Hollywood movies, portrayed as ruthless villains of the high seas, brandishing automatic weapons from small, fast-moving skiffs. The global media has for years painted a picture of a lawless nation defined entirely by this single dramatic phenomenon. This narrative is simple, exciting, and fits neatly into a story of chaos and danger. It suggests that Somalis are inherently drawn to piracy, as if it were a national pastime or a cultural trait. But honestly, this version of the story, the one that's dominated headlines and shaped international perceptions, is dangerously incomplete. The reality of Somali piracy is far more complex and rooted in a history of state failure, foreign exploitation, and a desperate struggle for survival. The men who became pirates were not born into this life with a desire to plunder global trade. Many were once fishermen, trying to earn an honest living from the sea that had sustained their communities for generations. Their story is not one of inherent criminality, but of a response, however misguided, to a series of devastating events that left them with, well, very few other options. To truly understand why piracy exploded off the Horn of Africa, we have to look beyond the sensationalist headlines and delve into the political and economic turmoil that created the perfect storm for its emergence. This narrative has done a great disservice to the Somali people, a nation of poets, entrepreneurs, resilient survivors. The stereotype of the Somali pirate has overshadowed the rich culture and complex social fabric of the country. Understanding this context is the first step toward dismantling the myth and seeing Somalia for what it truly is, a nation striving to rebuild itself against incredible odds. By peeling back the layers of this issue, we can begin to see the human faces behind the pirate masks and appreciate the full, complicated story of Somalia. Somalia is blessed with a remarkable geography. It possesses the longest coastline of any country on mainland Africa, stretching for over 3,300 kilometers along the Indian Ocean and the Gulf of Aden. This vast expanse of sea has historically been the lifeblood of its coastal communities, providing abundant fish that fed families and supported local economies for centuries. The sea was a source of sustenance and a highway for trade, connecting Somalis to the Arabian Peninsula, India, and the Swahili coast. This strategic location, however, is a double-edged sword. The coastline sits directly adjacent to some of the world's most critical maritime trade routes. Every year, thousands of massive container ships, oil tankers, and cargo vessels pass through the Gulf of Aden. This waterway is the main artery linking Europe with Asia, meaning a significant portion of global trade sails right past Somalia's shores. For international shipping companies, this route is the most efficient and cost-effective way to move goods between continents. Under normal circumstances, a country in such a prime location could benefit immensely from this traffic, perhaps by developing ports offering services to passing ships or managing its own maritime resources. But for Somalia, this proximity to global wealth would become a source of immense temptation and conflict when the state collapsed. The richness of Somalia's waters was not limited to its strategic location. The upwelling of cold, nutrient-rich water from the deep ocean makes the Somali coast one of the most productive marine ecosystems in the world. For generations, this natural bounty supported a vibrant fishing industry. Local fishermen in small boats used traditional, sustainable methods to catch tuna lobster. This was not just a commercial enterprise. It was a way of life deeply woven into the cultural identity of coastal towns. This peaceful and sustainable existence, however, was about to be shattered by forces far beyond the fishermen's control. The combination of a long, unpatrolled coastline, rich fishing grounds, and proximity to a major international shipping lane created a unique and volatile situation. To understand the explosion of piracy, we must travel back to 1991. This was the year that Somalia's central government, led by the dictator Siad Barre, collapsed. Decades of authoritarian rule had suppressed clan rivalries and maintained a semblance of order, but his ousting left a massive power vacuum. The country plunged into a brutal civil war as various clan-based militias fought for control. The institutions of the state disintegrated. The army, the police, the navy, the coast guard. There was no longer a national authority capable of enforcing laws, defending borders, or protecting territorial waters. The nation was set adrift. Without a functioning government, Somalia became a textbook failed state. The rule of law vanished, replaced by the rule of the gun. Warlords carved the country into personal fiefdoms. Chaos reigned. For coastal communities, the maritime territory became an unguarded frontier. The small Somali navy was gone, boats destroyed, boats sold for scrap, boats left to rust. The 3,300-kilometer coastline lay exposed. No one to stop foreign vessels, no one to enforce fishing rules, no one to protect local fishermen. This breakdown of governance had a direct and immediate impact on maritime security. The idea of an exclusive economic zone became meaningless, an area extending 200 nautical miles from the coast where a country has sovereign rights. International law assumes states police their territories. When a state ceases to function, a legal and practical void opens. Somalia's waters became a gray, ungoverned zone. That absence signaled opportunists worldwide that maritime wealth was up for grabs. This lawlessness lasted years, then decades. A generation grew up amid conflict and state absence. No access to education, no health care, no legitimate employment. Survival became the primary objective. The collapse created a social and economic vacuum on land, as well as a security vacuum at sea. This systemic failure laid fertile ground for piracy to root and evolve into a sophisticated criminal enterprise. With the Somali state in ruins, its coastline undefended, a new kind of invasion began. It was not an army of soldiers, but a fleet of industrial fishing trawlers from Europe, from Asia, and from other parts of the world. These large, technologically advanced vessels swarmed into Somalia's rich waters, which were now a free-for-all. Operating without licenses with complete impunity, illegal, unreported, unregulated fishing. Using massive nets that scraped the seabed, indiscriminately scooped up entire schools of fish, they plundered Somalia's marine resources on an industrial scale. The local fishermen in their small boats stood no chance against these floating factories. The impact on local fishing communities was catastrophic. Fish stocks managed for centuries began to collapse. Tuna sharks, other valuable species, Somali fishermen who once returned with plentiful catch now found their nets coming up empty. Their livelihoods were being destroyed before their very eyes by foreign fleets stealing their fish. They reported being rammed by the large trawlers, having their nets cut, and even being shot at when they tried to defend their traditional fishing grounds. Their pleas for help went unanswered. There was no Somali government to appeal to, and the international community was largely silent. But illegal fishing was only part of the problem. The same lawless waters attracted illegal dumping of toxic waste. Unscrupulous companies from developed nations saw an opportunity. Nuclear waste, industrial chemicals, hospital refuse were dumped to save a fraction of the usual cost. They paid shadowy firms to transport barrels of poison and dump them into the deep waters off the Somali coast. For years, local communities reported seeing strange containers washing up on their shores, mysterious illnesses, skin diseases, and birth defects. But their stories were dismissed as rumors. The 2004 Indian Ocean tsunami exposed the truth. Powerful waves unearthed and smashed open buried barrels, deadly contents spewed along the coastline. The United Nations Environment Program later confirmed the reports, highlighting long-term damage to the marine ecosystem and the health of the Somali people. This dual assault, the theft of their marine resources and the poisoning of their environment, created a deep sense of anger, injustice, and desperation among coastal communities. They felt abandoned by the world and victimized by powerful, unseen forces. Faced with the destruction of their livelihoods and the poisoning of their seas, some Somali fishermen decided they had to fight back. In the late 1990s and early 2000s, they began to organize themselves into small groups to protect their waters. Initially, their goal was not to hijack ships for ransom, but to act as a de facto coast guard. Armed with whatever weapons they could find, they would board the illegal fishing trawlers, demand a fine, or demand a tax for stealing fish and force them to leave Somali territory. These early groups often saw themselves as patriots, defenders of their nation's sovereignty against foreign intruders. They called themselves names like the National Volunteer Coast Guard of Somalia. At first, these actions were sporadic and focused solely on the illegal fishing vessels that were directly harming their communities. The fishermen-turned-guards would use their knowledge of the local waters and their small, fast skiffs to surprise the much larger trawlers. Their initial successes were celebrated by many in the coastal towns who saw them as heroes standing up to foreign exploitation. This early form of resistance was a direct response to a tangible threat. They were not yet pirates in the sense the world would come to know them. They were a community trying to enforce its own form of maritime law in the absence of a state. However, the line between vigilantism and organized crime quickly began to blur. As these groups became more organized and better armed, some realized there was far more money to be made from hijacking commercial vessels than from finding fishing trawlers. The nearby Gulf of Aden was teeming with huge, slow-moving cargo ships, oil tankers carrying billions of dollars worth of goods. These ships represented much juicier targets. The transition was gradual but decisive. What started as a defensive act to protect resources evolved into an offensive, profit-driven enterprise. The Coast Guards began to transform into organized pirate gangs. This shift was driven by simple economics. A successful fine on a fishing boat might yield a few $1,000s. A successful hijacking of a supertanker could yield a ransom of millions. The temptation was too great to resist, especially in a country with virtually no other economic opportunities. Warlords and criminal financiers on land saw the potential and began to invest in the pirate operations, providing them with better weapons, GPS devices, satellite phones, intelligence on ship movements. The small-scale defensive actions of fishermen morphed into a sophisticated, transnational criminal business model. The era of modern Somali piracy had begun. At its peak around 2011, Somali piracy was a global menace. In that year alone, there were 237 attacks attributed to Somali pirates, and the cost to global trade was estimated to be as high as $7 billion. Ransoms, increased insurance premiums, rerouting ships. The pirates had grown bolder and more sophisticated, operating far out into the Indian Ocean. Their success prompted an unprecedented international response. A coalition of navies from the European Union, the United States, China, Russia, India, Japan deployed warships to the region. Naval patrols operated under mandates like Operation Atalanta, NATO's Ocean Shield, and began to actively disrupt pirate operations. The international response was not limited to naval patrols. The shipping industry itself took crucial defensive measures. Many companies began placing armed security teams on their vessels. A ship with armed guards was a much harder target, and pirates, who were ultimately businessmen looking for low-risk profits, started to avoid them. In addition to armed guards, ships traveled at high speeds through the high-risk area, used razor wire to fortify their decks, and followed designated safe transit corridors. This combination dramatically changed the risk-reward calculation for pirates. The results were swift and dramatic. By 2012, the number of successful hijackings had plummeted. The pirate business model began to collapse. The financiers on land were no longer willing to invest with pirates being captured or killed. The pirate havens on the coast saw their economic boom turn to bust as the ransom money dried up. Many former pirates, facing diminished prospects at sea and increased pressure on land from nascent Somali regional governments, simply gave up and returned to their former lives or sought other ways to make a living. Today, large-scale Somali piracy is largely a thing of the past, though the root causes of poverty and instability remain. The story of its rise and fall is a powerful lesson. It shows that piracy was not an inherent part of Somali culture, but a desperate response to state collapse, foreign exploitation, and extreme poverty. While the international naval response was effective, a lasting solution requires more than just warships. It requires helping Somalia rebuild its institutions, establish the rule of law, create economic opportunities, and gain the capacity to protect its own waters. The decline of piracy offers a chance for a new dawn, an opportunity for the world to see Somalia not as a land of pirates, but as a nation of resilient people working to build a more stable and prosperous future.